a lot of times people say, well, I'm just not hungry for breakfast, or I'm just not hungry till 2 p.m. I'm just not hungry in the middle of the day when I'm at work. So, do I listen to that? If I always listen to my hunger, I would never eat because I just don't feel hungry. So, if you've gotten to a point where you've healed your relationship with food and you still don't feel like you have proper hunger signals, that's when we start to utilize something called practical hunger. Welcome to Behind the Binge, the podcast where we bring forth much needed conversations about binge eating recovery and ditching diet culture. I'm your host, Marissa Kai-Millick, a registered dietitian, nutritionist, and binge eating coach. This is our space to dive into practical tips to heal from binge eating, challenge your diet culture beliefs, discuss the nuances of intuitive eating, and empower you to recover. Let's start exploring what's behind the binge. Hello, everyone. Happy Monday. Welcome back to the podcast. I hope you had a great weekend. It was super warm here. And mind you, this is a week in advance. So this was the last weekend of March. It was like 85 here. It was so nice. It was my dog's birthday. So we went out to a brewery and it was super fun. It kind of felt like the real world was kind of coming back, which then again, I live in the South and we're not necessarily the prime example throughout this pandemic, but it was safe. It was fun. It was just me and my boyfriend. I almost said partner and boyfriend at the same time, my partner, my boyfriend. And we had a great time and we celebrated my dog, Winnie, who just turned 10, which is just crazy. Anyway, hope you all had a great weekend as well. I am excited to talk about today's topic because it is a topic that's pretty simple, but has a lot of nuances to it and a lot of nuances that I don't think get talked about enough. So I really want to dive into hunger today, talking all about listening to our hunger. Is it just listening to our hunger, or what if we don't feel hungry? What if we don't get hunger signals? What do we do with that? And go from there, because intuitive eating is a lot about listening to your body. I'm pretty sure that's like the core of intuitive eating, although there are 10 principles. The main premise of it is learning how to build attunement to your body signals and listen to that so you don't have to listen to external validators like a diet ever again. And so with listening to our body comes listening to our hunger and listening to our fullness. However, intuitive eating is not just the hunger fullness diet, right? We don't just listen to our hunger and stop eating when we're full and move on. Absolutely not, because it's not that simple. Like I said, it's a simple topic, but it's not that simple because life happens and sometimes you're not going to be hungry when it's your birthday and somebody is offering you a cupcake, or when you just kind of have a taste for something that your partner brought home from work and you're like, yeah, that sounds good, but you're not actually hungry. And sometimes you don't really get hunger signals. So what do we do with that to make sure that we're still eating enough to prevent binges and also just normally satisfy our basic needs to keep us strong and healthy? So, kind of diving in, I have some notes on my phone of things I want to talk about because I actually tried to record this podcast once before, just kind of freeballing it with no notes or anything. And I tend to talk in circles. My ADHD brain does not do so good without a little bit of structure. So I made myself some notes of what I want to make sure that I touch on, and in an order to make it a little bit easier for the listeners to follow. So the first thing I want to talk about are normal hunger signals. So if you are getting hunger signals and you feel you can listen to those, you can start to tune into what those sound like for you. Because in general, we think that hunger comes from our stomach, and it is that empty feeling in our stomach, that grumbling in our tummy that tells us that we're hungry. And while sure, that is a hunger signal and maybe the main hunger signal for you, it's not the main hunger signal for me. If I feel that empty pit in my stomach feeling, that usually means that it's a little too late and I'm probably starving. So, my first hunger signal is actually just that I think about food, right? It's simply that I start to think about food. And that doesn't mean I'm just bored. That doesn't mean I'm just, trying to distract myself from an emotion. It's just simply I'm hungry. If I start to kind of feel that pull to my pantry, it means I need food. My second signal that I tend to get a lot is a headache. If I start to get that afternoon crash where I get a headache, sure, maybe it's from caffeine or something like that. But most of the time, it's just, oh, it's lunchtime and I didn't realize, the time got the best of me and I forgot to eat lunch. Let's go grab a sandwich. So those are my top two signals. And if I get to the point where I do have that grumbling stomach feeling, I'm definitely really hungry. But some other common signals of hunger may be nausea, it may be cold chills, body aches, fatigue, distractibility. There's all sorts of signals that your body sends you when you're hungry, and you're the only one who's going to be able to figure out what that sounds like for you. So, starting to tune into your body as you feel hunger will be really helpful. Yes, it may be at first you're mostly just tuning into that empty feeling in your stomach. But with time, you might start to identify earlier signs of hunger before it really hits that really extreme hunger. And maybe it is just the empty feeling in your stomach that you feel, and that's totally fine to listen to. But yeah, starting to get curious about what that feels like and sounds like for you will be really helpful when it comes to listening to your body and trusting your body. And the next thing I want to talk about is the hunger fullness scale. So, this is a scale that's pretty widely taught with intuitive eating just to help you get an idea about when you eat. Are you waiting until you're too hungry? And when you eat, are you eating to extreme fullness? And how can we kind of find a middle ground there? So, the hunger fullness scale is a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being super starving, 10 being super, super full. Maybe you overate. So, and everybody kind of has their own interpretation of the scale. So, I'm going to explain it from my own interpretation. But this is widely discussed in the Intuitive Eating book by Evelyn Tribole and Elise Reich. And so many intuitive eating professionals on Instagram talk about this and share different scales. I know my friend Kate Conklin, she is in the intuitive dietitian on Instagram. Hold on, don't quote me. Let me look it up because I don't want to tell you the wrong handle. Yeah, intuitive.dietitian. She posted like a thread on her Instagram going through the hunger fullness scale, which was really helpful. But my interpretation of it is 1 is really starving, 2 is you're starting to feel a little too full, 3 is comfortably hungry. Oh, not too full, too hungry. So you're starving, a little too hungry, and then 3 would be comfortably hungry, 4 would be hungry. I'm hungry, but kind of teetering on the line of indifferent. And then 5 would be pretty neutral. Like I could eat if I'm going to go a few hours without eating. Now would be a good time to eat, but also I'm not starving. Maybe just kind of starting to think about food a little bit. So, and then fullness kind of goes from there, but we're not going to dive into that right now. But if you wait until you're a 1, you're going to be more likely to eat till a 10. So if I wait until my stomach feels empty, I'm starving, I'm just like ravenous, yeah, I'm probably going to eat to a 10. I'm probably going to eat pretty quickly, and I'm probably going to eat whatever is the most convenient and satisfying because I just need some quick energy. And that's what my body is telling me I need with good reason. So you want to try to find your hunger levels when they're at a 3 or a 4, when you feel comfortably hungry, but you can make rational decisions based on that hunger with what's going to satisfy you, nutritionally, satisfaction wise, just like your taste, and what's going to give you that satiation long enough till your next meal or snack. So if you wait until you're a 1, it's not something you should judge yourself about. It's just something you should stay curious about. Why did I wait until I was a 1? Was I unaware of the signals my body is sending me about hunger? Was I really distracted during, I don't know, let's say the afternoon, that I wasn't able to tune into my body? Was I unable to get access to food? Maybe I was on a drive and I couldn't stop. I got stuck in traffic, something like that. Or was this just something that regularly comes up every day at 4 o'clock and I need to start implementing a new plan so this ravenous feeling doesn't hit me at the same time every day? Get curious as to why it's happening so that way you can work to implement a better plan for next time to ensure that you get enough food in before you hit that extreme hunger. So we want to try to stay around a 3 or 4 when we decide to feed ourselves. That doesn't mean you can't eat at a 5 or a 6. That doesn't mean you have to stuff your face if you're a 1. But this curiosity with using the hunger scale will help you to really connect with your body, what it needs, and what makes you feel your best. So that's the hunger skill that we use with clients, or I use with my clients when we feel they have trustworthy hunger fullness signals. However, most binge eating clients who come to work with me do not have trustworthy hunger fullness signals. Most binge eating clients that come to work with me, their hunger fullness signals are so thrown off from restriction and binging. And I want to explain a little bit about why. So, the reason why people don't get proper hunger signals, maybe just genetically, you just don't feel hungry until 3, or it's just part of your routine, it's habitual. But I'm talking about from my experience with my clients and my own personal experience with binge eating. You're not getting proper hunger fullness signals because your hunger fullness hormones are out of whack. If you have been restricting extremely or just on some sort of diet, restricting certain food groups, feeling that restrictive nature of a diet, it's likely that your hunger hormones have increased and your fullness hormones have decreased. Meaning, the hormone that tells you that you're full is no longer regularly making itself present. It's no longer sending that signal from the stomach to your brain to say, hey, we're good, we're full, we're at capacity, you can move on for a bit, because it's scared it's not going to get enough later. If you are chronically under eating or dieting, your body sees that as a famine and it's not going to want to tell you you're full because it's going to want to make sure that it has enough to sustain you through the next quote unquote famine. So that's why you may feel a lack of satiation with what you're eating, even if you feel like you're eating a really good amount and you feel physically full, like maybe you're a little bloated, but you still feel like you could keep eating. That would be why. And then also alongside that, your hunger hormones increase. So your brain is constantly sending out that hunger of just, yeah, keep eating, that hunger in your brain, the mental hunger, saying, keep eating, keep eating, keep eating. We need more, 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 with good reason, right? It's trying to protect you and make sure that you have enough food to sustain your activities of daily living and keep yourself alive and functioning well. So it's trying to get you to eat more if it's scared it's not going to get enough, or if it's actively not getting enough. So it is a protective measure that our body kicks into when we are in a state of famine, or AKA dieting. So that tends to be the state that I get most of my clients in. They're coming off of a diet, or they've extremely dieted in the past and they never got that regulation back. That doesn't mean it's a lost cause. We absolutely can heal our hunger fullness hormones, and we absolutely can get back trust and consistency with our hunger fullness signals. So the way you do this would be to eat enough and eat enough consistently. And that is the very first step I implement with my clients when we start working together. Before we ever talk about listening to our hunger fullness hormones, it's simply eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner with snacks in between those meals, optional. If that's something that you feel like you need, which most people do, I do, but at least breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And the more consistently you do that, the more likely you're going to be to get that regulation with your hormones again, and also trust with your body that, oh, she's not going to go back on another diet. Okay, we can start to regulate things again. We trust that we're going to get enough food. And so you may need to eat more at the beginning to build back that trust, but it's kind of like if you lose trust with a friend, you're not just going to be able to dive back into your friendship as usual, as normal. You have to gain back their trust. You may have to do a little bit more to say, hey, you can trust me. I'm sorry for what I did in the past, but I'm not going to do it again. You really have to prove that with your body. So you have to eat enough. You may be eating more than what you think is quote unquote normal, but by doing that consistently, your appetite will regulate again, and you'll be able to listen to those signals. Not right off the bat. That's why I never tell my binge eating clients, just when they come to me, just listen to your body. They can't listen to their body, but we can work together to be able to get that back. But whether it's those types of clients or just other people, a lot of times people say, well, I'm just not hungry for breakfast, or I'm just not hungry till 2 p.m. I'm just not hungry in the middle of the day when I'm at work. So do I listen to that? If I always listen to my hunger, I would never eat because I just don't feel hungry. So if you've gotten to a point where you've healed your relationship with food and you still don't feel like you have proper hunger signals, that's when we start to utilize something called practical hunger. So it's kind of another type of hunger. So practical hunger is this idea that we know that eating consistently and eating enough gives us sustained, consistent energy levels throughout the day to make sure that we're eating enough to fuel our body, whether or not we feel side effects of that or not, whether or not we're actually binge eating or we feel fatigue from not eating enough. It's still important that we eat enough to, maintain our muscles, maintain our immune system, and maintain our mental clarity, our wellness, our focus, all of that stuff. That all takes energy. Even just thinking alone takes energy. And so, if we're not eating enough, we're going to have a hard time coming up with these brilliant ideas to rule the world. So, it's important to eat enough. And that's when we have to utilize practical hunger. So, practical hunger is that idea, like I just explained, that we have to eat enough, regardless of if our body is telling us to eat or not. So, now, let me give an example that might explain this a little better. I have a client with ADHD who is on ADHD medication that suppresses her appetite. That's another reason why somebody may not have good attunement to their hunger fullness hormones if their medication suppresses their appetite. Yeah, that's going to be a big indicator that we're going to need to be a bit more practical and intentional with our behaviors rather than just simply relying on these signals, because the signals that our body would be sending us is suppressed. So we can't listen to that. So we implemented routines for her to eat breakfast. An alarm goes off in the middle of the day to remind her to check in to see if she needs some lunch, and eat dinner. She usually feels hungry for dinner, but not for breakfast and lunch. So for breakfast and lunch, we are more intentional about eating meals that gives her sustainable energy throughout the day. It also helps with the utilization of her ADHD meds. So she's not just running on a stimulant, she's also running on genuine energy from calories. So we had to be intentional about that. She's not listening to her hunger signals, absolutely not, but she's still being intuitive by being practical. So another example of this is somebody who just gets really bogged down at work and doesn't really have a lot of time for themselves. They're really busy and overwhelmed and they hyper focus on their job. So they may eat breakfast, they may eat dinner, but in the middle of the day, they feel so rushed, they don't have time for themselves, so they just eat like a granola bar for lunch, and they're so distracted by work that they don't feel their hunger at all. So in that case, the exact same thing. We're going to utilize practical hunger to understand that it's not the best to go 7, 8 hours without eating from breakfast to dinner. And we're more likely to binge in the evenings if we don't have lunch, even if our body's not telling us we're hungry. We can be practical. So we'll implement a plan together to make time for a lunch or make a quick and energizing nutrient calorically dense lunch to get in, even if there's only a short period of time to eat, to prevent that binge in the evening or to prevent that energy crash later in the afternoon. So that that's practical hunger. We're practical. And that is part of intuitive eating. So when people come to me and they say, I just don't feel hungry, I'm like, that's okay. But we still have to be practical and we still have to eat enough. I like to think of it when we're utilizing practical hunger, I like to think of it like self-care. For example, I hate like anything hygiene. I don't know why. Obviously, I do shower, I brush my teeth, do all of these things every single day, but I like resent it. I every time I go to brush my teeth, I'm like, "Oh, I know it's only 2 minutes, but I really don't wanna do this." But I do it anyway because it's self-care, it's practical. If I intuitively listened to what I wanted to do and what would give me instant gratification in that moment, I absolutely would be stinky and smelly and have teeth rotting out of my head. But as a form of self-care and for future me, it's important that I take care of my personal hygiene. Same with eating. Use it in that same way. In the moment, no, it doesn't feel great to not listen to your hunger, and it may be a bit confusing, but we know long term it will help us to have the nourishment to be the best versions of ourselves. Without nourishment, we can't be the best versions of ourselves. Even if we don't immediately feel the result of that, we will feel it in the future, whether that is the next day, the next hour, or the next month, the next year, it will catch up to us. So it's important to put those those routines in place to make sure that we are eating enough and fueling ourselves the best that we can with the signals that we're given. So, yeah, I hope that explains practical hunger and kind of the differences between listening to your hunger, getting consistent hungerfulness signals back, and what to do if you don't feel hungry. If you feel like if you listen to your hunger, you would just never eat, how to implement practical hunger. So, I want to end this. This is a pretty quick podcast episode, but I want to end this by going through some questions that people submitted on my Instagram. I put this on my Instagram at binge.nutritionist, but I would love if you have anything podcast related to go to behind the binge on Instagram and let me know over there what you want to see more of or if you have any questions. So, I got a good amount of questions submitted. Let's go through this. First question. Should I eat even though I'm not hungry but knowingly haven't eaten in a long time? I'm going to go ahead and give you a second to answer this. What do you think I'm going to say? Yes. It's called practical hunger. I have worked with a lot of let me give another example. I've worked with a lot of clients before who they'll eat lunch and then they'll eat dinner and they will have a binge after dinner or they'll overeat at dinner and they're like, I don't understand. I ate enough all day. I listened to my hunger. I listened to my fullness. I felt satisfied, but the late night binge still hits me. And I say, okay, when do you eat lunch? Noon. When do you eat dinner? 6, 6:30, 7 some nights. Okay, so that's around 6 to 7 hours without eating. And when I put that into perspective, a lot of people are like, "Oh, yeah, that's a long time." We should be aiming to eat every 2 to 4 hours depending on your needs, your energy levels, and your routines. So, I tend to eat every 4 hours just based on my routine. I'm more likely to have bigger meals than a bunch of little snacks. So, you'll figure out what that looks like for you, but for this client, we may implement a snack in the afternoon. I'm thinking of one client in specific, but, this has happened with so many people I've worked with. So with this client, we implemented a afternoon snack after she got off work. She had a granola bar in her car that she ate on the way to go pick up her kiddo from school, and that minimized her binges significantly. So she never felt hunger after work, but we implemented that snack practically to minimize the binge. So, yes, my answer is yes. If you know that a long time has passed and you haven't eaten, but you don't feel hungry, I would suggest still eating something. We have to be practical about those time frames. What are your thoughts on planning meals ahead of time, ahead of feeling hungry due to time? So, what are your thoughts around planning meals ahead of feeling hungry due to time? Totally fine. You know how many nurses I've worked with who have the most strict schedules where they're eating at 11:30 every single day and they have 20 minutes and that's it. And even if they don't feel hungry, they have to utilize that time. That's another practical way of listening to your body. And if you find a pattern as well, if you're somebody who doesn't have a rigid schedule, but you find a pattern that every day at 4 you feel hungry, so now you're going to plan to eat at 3 to prevent that extreme hunger at 4 from hitting. That's absolutely great. I totally support that. So, yes, meal planning and just planning in general can be really great ways of being practical and listening to your body that way. What should I do when I think about food all the time, but my stomach doesn't feel hungry? That sounds like mental hunger. So, like I was saying, the second point that I made about how clients that come to work with me may not feel hunger signals accurately, it feels more in their head, like their brain just keeps telling them to eat, even when they feel that physical sensation of fullness. That's because your hunger fullness signals are out of whack, and consistent eating patterns and satisfying that mental hunger will be the best thing that you can do for your body in those situations. Obviously, make sure that you speak with a healthcare provider before implementing that tip. Basically, all of my podcasts are just education and entertainment purposes only, because there's something called refeeding syndrome. If you've been severely under eating and you're experiencing that mental hunger and you honor that, you can go into refeeding syndrome, which can be really dangerous and fatal. So, if you're somebody who's been extremely restricting or you have anorexia, something like that, I would make sure you listen to your healthcare provider and your treatment team before implementing that. But people who may be healing from the restrict binge cycle, like in my groups, I say honor that hunger, honor that mental hunger, eat enough to satisfy that feeling, and eventually your appetite will regulate. It will. So if you feel like your brain is telling you to eat even when you feel physically hungry, that's a sign that that hormone regulation is off and we want to get that back. So we would implement some strategies to do that. Any advice for when you do not eat from hunger but from anxiety and boredom? Yeah, so I first want to let you know that eating emotionally is not always a bad thing. Sometimes all we need is a warm bowl of mac and cheese, and that's the only thing that's going to hit the spot when we're feeling that way, and that's okay. But if it's happening all of the time, then we want to create some other coping strategies, some other ways to de-stress or to manage our anxiety when that happens. So it's just something to sort of be aware of. Try to break the stigma that every time you eat emotionally, you're bad or it's the worst thing that you could be doing, because that can just cause more guilt and shame, causing you to overeat further. But when it comes to eating from boredom, the reason why we reach for food when we're bored is because when we're bored, we're usually lacking dopamine. And dopamine is what gives us that excitement. It's what lights up our brain and gives, us that feeling of stimulation. And I experience that a lot with ADHD, reaching for food for stimulation because I lack dopamine, but I've been able to find strategies to give myself that dopamine kick throughout the day without it being reliant on food. And I work on that with my clients as well. So if you find yourself constantly reaching for food anytime you're bored, find other ways to kind of stimulate your brain and get everything exciting again rather than it being reliant on food. Sometimes food can be that for you. Absolutely okay. We just don't want it to be all the time or in a way that it leads to binge eating. So, what I would recommend doing is finding a routine that you can implement in your day to minimize this boredom eating, whether it's getting up and stretching every hour to get yourself moving again, whether it's planning a 15-minute walk in the middle of your day, if that's something you're able to do, or getting some sort of fidget toy. Like I have these like fidget rings that are like acupuncture rings that just give me a little bit of stimulation throughout the day. It's just whatever works for you and whatever feels good and satisfying to you. It's all about that intention, creating routines and creating new patterns and new habits to support what you become aware of as you heal your relationship with food. So, sounds like you're aware of your bored eating and your anxiety eating, but how are you gonna heal that, and what are you gonna do with that? Alongside breaking the stigma that it's the worst thing in the world to eat when you feel that way, because it's not. So let me answer one more question. I actually think I answered all of these questions because one says like, how do you listen to your hunger when on meds that suppress appetite? I went through that. If I listen to my hunger, it's simple. I'm never hungry. I talked about that. I talked about boredom eating and eating emotionally, different types of hunger. Yes, there's, true biological hunger and there's mental hunger and there's practical hunger. What are some not so obvious signs of hunger? Like I mentioned, our headache, thinking about food, nausea, cold chills, body aches, fatigue, distractibility. I think I answered pretty much all these questions. So that's great. All right, let's wrap up this episode. I hope what you took from this episode is that listening to your body and listening to your hunger is not simply the hungerfulness diet. Only eat when you're hungry and always stop when you're full. Absolutely not. That's just not human. It's not practical. And our daily lives constantly are changing. And so it's important to be flexible and just stay curious with what your body needs on a day to day basis. Implement strategies and patterns, routines where needed if you feel like you have to utilize more of a practical hunger approach, and work on healing your relationship with food if you feel like your hunger and fullness is so out of whack, you have no attunement or trust to your body. And in saying that, I would love to help you do that. I've helped hundreds of women and also a few men now and non binary peeps heal their relationship with food, stop binge eating, gain back trust and attunement to their body so that they can create their most healthful life. I created a group coaching program that was exactly what I felt like I needed when I was struggling with my relationship with food. So I've really poured my heart and soul into this from my past self so that way you can get to food freedom faster. So if you're interested in learning more about my group coaching program, you can check out my Instagram at binge.nutritionist to learn more about it, or go to my website, makainutrition.com. That's MAKAI nutrition.com. And there you can find all the information about my group coaching. And I would love to support you on your journey to binge freedom. So I super appreciate you. I'm stumbling on my words. Appreciate you listening to today's podcast. If you have any suggestions or questions for podcast episodes, be sure to let me know over on my Instagram at behind.the.binge. I wish I could just say behind the binge, but that was taken. And if you like this, make sure you leave me a review. It's super helpful and really helps the algorithm. And I really appreciate the feedback. And I will see you on the next episode. I hope you have a great week and see you next Monday. Bye, everyone.